welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned, please take a moment to introduce yourselves, your farm or your organization and your location in the chat. We will have a few presentations to start off the webinar, and then we will have time for questions and group discussion. During the presentation portion of the webinar, please keep yourself muted and your camera off, as we are recording for folks who can't make it. Please do jot down your questions or put them in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them when we're in the discussion portion of the meeting. My name is Julia Barton with the Organic Farmers Association, which was created by farmers for farmers to provide a strong, unified national voice for domestic certified organic producers. We will hear today from a member of the Iowa Department of Agriculture, Jim Kennedy, from Tanya and Shane Johnson, farmers from Minnesota, and from Kevin Fulton, organic farmer from Nebraska. But to get us started, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Harriet Behar.
Hi, everyone. I'm Harriet Behar, a Farmer Services consultant with the Organic Farmers Association, and welcome to this webinar where farmers will review their interactions with the Pipeline Foods bankruptcy and provide some context for how to protect yourself where possible from this very difficult situation. We'll review what might happen if a buyer goes bankrupt and your grain and/or payments could be caught up in the legal ramifications of this type of business failure. These types of bankruptcies are not rare across agriculture as a whole, but large-scale bankruptcies have not been common in the organic supply chain until the past few years. This webinar will concentrate on the Pipeline Foods bankruptcy that was declared in July of 2021. How farmers were affected, how they dealt with it, and what could be done to try to protect yourself in the future. There will be time at the end for questions and discussion. Bankruptcy affects farmers selling to a business in a variety of ways. They could never receive payment for their shipment. The business could send you a clawback letter requiring you to return payments sent within 90 days before the business declared their bankruptcy, or the business could require you to follow your signed contract and deliver grain after they've declared bankruptcy, even though you never would get payment for that delivery. Those clawback letters are especially onerous, demanding that full amount paid to the farmer within that 90 days. Within 21 days of receipt of the clawback letter, and our two farmers will talk about what it was like to get those letters. These letters do not come registered. They are usually quite a surprise. And since they could be received by the farmer up to 2 years after the company has declared bankruptcy, it really is an unwanted communication. Many times the farmer needs to loan to pay the amount requested in that clawback letter, resulting in extra interest payments and even more economic hardship. I mean, just imagine if you were told you had to pay back some money from 2 years ago. It's definitely probably not still sitting in your bank account. Even with some states requiring their grain buyers to be licensed and bonded, and others having indemnity funds to cover farmer losses, if the grain buyer's business fails, the safeguards in place at the state level are not strong enough to protect farmers from significant losses due to a grain buyer's bankruptcy. Pipeline Foods was located in Minnesota, and when Minnesota farmers approached their state for help, the state stopped Pipeline from demanding Minnesota farmers continue to deliver grain even after that bankruptcy. And then that the farmer would never receive payment. This illustrates the strength that farmers working together can have, especially when they're trying to correct a wrong that's occurring to them. This webinar will touch on the various legal options that the farmers have and don't have when writing contracts and interacting with bankruptcy law. However, we are not providing legal advice. Bankruptcy is covered under a federal law, but each state oversees commerce between farmers and their buyers, making this legal landscape even more difficult to understand and traverse. If you grow the grain in one state and deliver it to a facility in a different state, the law covering this delivery and sale gets even more complicated. Learning the laws governing grain buying and selling in your own could be important homework for each grain grower, and learning and working with other farmers and your state government to strengthen their rules before you might be affected by bankruptcy could be a very worthwhile enterprise. The forthcoming Organic Voice magazine, the publication of the Organic Farmers Association, has an article on various other strategies than you'll hear today used by organic farmers to address those clawbacks. An upcoming blog post will try to illuminate what happened within Pipeline Foods, which led up to the bankruptcy. Please be aware there still are numerous lawsuits active in that Pipeline Foods bankruptcy, and we will not dig deeply into the financial health or business dealings of Pipeline. If you have questions, we will be hosting that discussion webinar, as well as responding to any question that you put in the chat box, either during the webinar or afterwards. So let me now turn it back over to our webinar facilitator, Julia Barton, who will then introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Harriet. And first up, we have a recorded message from James Kennedy, who is the Bureau Chief of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, for a brief pre-recorded message. Jim was not able to make it today, but he will be sharing about 8 minutes of information with us about the Iowa Indemnity Fund, claim lengths under that fund, and communication regarding a lack of prompt payment. Thankfully, we also have Jim's colleague, Brad Bremer, with us today. Thank you for being here, Brad, to answer questions during the discussion portion of the meeting. So please do jot down your questions or pop them into the chat so that Brad can answer them a little bit later. We'll just go ahead and give this video a shot.
Good afternoon. This is Jim Kennedy. I am the Grain Warehouse Bureau Chief of the Iowa Department of Agriculture Grain Warehouse Bureau. Our bureau is the regulatory agency that oversees the grain dealer and warehouse licensing in the state of Iowa. The topic for discussion today is the Iowa Grain Indemnity Fund. This fund started back in 1986 as a method of protection for producers in the case of any grain dealer or warehouse failure. It's come to light the last couple of years when we've had 3 recent failures within the state of Iowa with Pipeline Foods, B&B Farm Store, and Global Processing. So with the Iowa Indemnity Fund, the Indemnity Fund covers 90% of a producer's sold grain up to a $300,000 cap per individual. The coverage must be, in order for this to be a covered transaction, the grain must have been delivered to an Iowa licensed grain dealer or warehouse, and that sale of grain must have occurred within 6 months of that license failure. And what we consider to be a failure would be license revocation, a license cancellation, or the filing of bankruptcy. Producers would have to file a claim with the Grain Warehouse Bureau, and all claimants, once we determine that there is a failure, we do our best job to try to determine the amount of outstanding obligations that company would owe and to whom they would owe them to, and then we can get addresses and we would send out notifications to each individual possible or potential claimant, along with the notification, the official publication notification.
Recording in progress.
The claims, or the claim filing period, is 120 days from that date of failure, or once again, the failure would be considered revocation date, cancellation of the license date, or bankruptcy filing date. So the claimant would have 120 days from that date to file a claim with the Grain Warehouse Bureau or the Grain Indemnity Fund, or to be considered to be a valid and timely filed claim. And once again, that claim would be paid at 90% up to $300,000. There has to be a documented loss. So it's only that the Grain Indemnity Fund covers only grain that has been delivered. If there are future delivery contracts or grain get contracted ahead that you have not delivered, the Indemnity Fund does not cover the price differential of what your contract was for compared to what you might sell it for at another location or another grain dealer. We only cover the losses for delivered grain that has not been paid within that 6-month time. And once again, this is a producer-only coverage. So if the grain that you are delivering is considered to be a second purchase, it would not be a covered transaction. This is only for producers, and it's only on the first point of sale. In the case of pipeline, as far as the clawback, that was one of the topics that Kate wanted me to kind of talk about. I don't know a whole lot about the clawback procedure, but I do know that we did have some producers that would file claims in anticipation that there might be some clawback. However, at the time of filing, they still have to file that claim within 120 days. And at the time of filing, there was not a loss. The producer had been paid for his grain. The check had cleared the bank, so there was no documented loss. So once that claim was filed, we reviewed it, and at the time we reviewed it, there was no loss. Thus, that claim was denied because at the time there had been no documented loss. After that time frame, then there's a chance, or that clawback, the producer was notified that there was a clawback that they were to pay back into the bankruptcy, which was well after the filing period had ended. Thus, the coverage for the Grain Indemnity Fund for Iowa did not exist because right now the statutes for Iowa Grain Indemnity Fund has no provisions to take care of this situation. We are only covering those losses that have occurred within 6 months once that producer files that claim within that 120 days. After that 120 days, it's not considered to be a timely filed claim and thus would have no coverage under the Grain Indemnity Fund. Some of the other things that she wanted me to talk about was some of our regulations for grain dealers and warehouse, basically grain dealers have for making payment to producers. Once again, our law is a producer protection law. So this would not apply if you are making second purchases or second sales to the Iowa licensed grain dealer. But as far as a first purchase from a producer, that grain dealer has 30 days to make payment for grain to a producer. So once that grain is delivered and priced, and that pricing dictates, that 30 days begins, payment has to be made within that 30 days or upon demand by the producer. So if a producer comes in today, delivers his grain, and once he delivers that grain, demands payment for that, the elevator, that grain dealer, is obligated to make payment. Now, we also realize that it may take a little bit for that grain dealer to determine the net weight, the grades, the discounts, everything else that would apply to that grain. So there might be a little bit of a short window of maybe 2 to 3 days for that elevator or grain dealer to actually get that payment ready to be sent out to the producer. But it's upon demand. Absent of demand, they are required to file to make payment within 30 days, unless the producer and the grain dealer enter into what we call or consider a credit sale contract. This credit sale contract would be, some types of credit sale contracts are a deferred payment contract, a price later agreement, or no price established, a basis type credit sale contract, a minimum price contract, all types of contracts where the title of the grain transfers to the buyer, but yet either the payment or the pricing mechanism has not been set and leaves that up to the producer to set the pricing terms at a future date. But the only way that grain dealer is going to be able to obtain title to that grain is by the signature of that properly executed credit sale contract. But absent of that credit sale contract, payment is required to be made within 30 days of pricing and or delivery. If there are questions or concerns about an elevator that a producer may have requested payment and they have not either paid them, they keep putting them off as far as if the check would be in the mail or we'll send it shortly. If they have concerns with that, they can always give our office a call or or send me an email, and then we will follow up on that complaint that producer may have. We do take the payment of grain very seriously in Iowa, as far as making sure that everybody documents those correctly and gets paid. But once again, this only relates to an Iowa licensed grain dealer. If the producer is selling grain to an unlicensed dealer, they are not protected by the Indemnity Fund, and they also are not protected by the Iowa law. We still might want to know about the transaction, because we might need to go out and investigate if there is an illegal grain dealer operating in Iowa, but they would have no protection under the fund if they're selling to a non-licensed Iowa entity. It has to be, for the coverage to take a place, it has to be through an Iowa licensed grain dealer. I want to just say thank you for the opportunity to share the information that we have with this. If you have any questions or complaints or questions, I guess, feel free to reach out to either Kate or Julia at the Organic Farmers Association, or you could call our office directly. And I believe Julie will be able to pass that information on to you as far as what that email and phone numbers are. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
And thank you to Jim for taking the time to record that for us. Next, we will hear from Tanya Johnson of Minnesota, and maybe also Shane. It looks like he's still with us. Shane and Tanya Johnson began farming in Southwest Minnesota part-time with Shane's father in 1999, and then full-time in 2013. They're currently growing a mix of non-GMO and non-conventional corn and soybeans on about 1,200 acres. They started growing food-grade soybeans in 2017 for Sun Opta in Hope, Minnesota, which was then acquired by Pipeline Foods in February of 2019. And they are here to share their story about the Pipeline Foods bankruptcy and how it impacted them. So thank you for being here, Tanya and Shane, and do please feel free to come on camera and unmute yourselves to share with us. I have your slides ready.
Hi, Julia. So we're having tech issues also with our computer. So you probably see me on the laptop, but are hearing me on the cell phone. So might be a little wonky, but
that's okay. Appreciate you being here.
okay. So I guess you asked us to share a couple of pictures. So the first picture that's up was just a picture of our yard, and that was taken, I think, in 2020. As you can see, it was a drought year. We're located in Southwest Minnesota, and Shane farms about 1,200 acres here. So just a quick overview of that.
And can you see, do you want me to just keep going through your photos here?
Sure. So on the second photo with the rainbow, just showing that sometimes it does even rain here in Southwest Minnesota, although it doesn't happen very often. When it does, we have to get the camera and take a picture. All right, and then here is a field of non-GMO soybeans. They're just starting to dry down and getting ready for harvest. So this is what we're growing and what we were growing for Pipeline Foods. So this is what we'll be addressing today. And here's the other half of Shane's crops are usually planted to corn. And he's always happy when it's knee-high by the 4th of July, even better when it's over his shoulders. And as everyone who lives in the Midwest knows, it snows in the wintertime. So he thought it was kind of a neat picture of what it takes to get out to the neighbor's house. So we have a lot of elderly neighbors and spend a lot of time helping them get out of their yards. So
that's great. And I can just back up a slide. We can look at your corn maybe while you share with us about your experience with Pipeline.
okay, that sounds great. So we started growing non-GMO soybeans for SunOpta back in 2017. SunOpta was acquired by Pipeline Foods in or around February of 2019. We got notified in 2019 of that acquisition, and they asked us to re-execute new contracts with Pipeline Foods. And we re-executed those contracts under the assurance that all of the business would continue under the same terms and conditions that we had with SunOpta. During the 2020 growing season, Shane started to notice changes in Pipeline Foods personnel. He noticed that they seemed to be firing most of their most experienced employees. And that was the first red flag that we had with Pipeline Foods. While he was marketing the 2020 crop in the spring of 2021, the grain buyer that he had been working with that had carried over from SunOpta told Shane that he was also being laid off. And then he gave Shane the contact info of the person that would be taking over his account. During Shane's first conversation with that new guy, Shane told him that he was growing non-GMO soybeans. And the new guy asked him, are those the round ones or the flat yellow ones? This new person at Pipeline Foods literally did not know the difference between corn and soybeans. And that was Shane's second and by far largest red flag with Pipeline Foods so far. Because of those red flags, we thought we might need to mitigate our risk with Pipeline going forward. When Pipeline asked Shane to deliver soybeans, he told them he would only deliver 3 loads. And once they paid for those loads per the net 14 payment terms of the contract, he would then deliver more soybeans. That cycle repeated successfully a few times in the spring of 2021, and things were rolling along without issue until Shane went to deliver his last 5 loads of soybeans. After Shane delivered his last 5 loads of soybeans, he had to sit back and wait for the net 14 payment terms to receive his final payment. April 14th, 2021 was the first due date for the first of those 5 last loads delivered, and payment did not come. In fact, payment didn't come for any of the last 5 loads that were delivered. Shane contacted them to ask when he would be receiving payment, and he told them he was on the schedule for payment next week. The following week, still no payment. He called and was told the same thing. Eventually, Pipeline did send a check and pay Shane for the final 5 loads on April 22nd, 2021. This payment was late by about 2 weeks. Shane was relieved to receive payment for the final 5 loads of soybeans that were delivered, and we made up our minds not to do any future business with Pipeline Foods. We received notice that Pipeline Foods filed bankruptcy later that year on July 8th of 2021. Shane's first thought was, well, that's not surprising, considering they fired all of their experienced employees, and now they were left with employees that didn't seem to know the difference between corn and soybeans. We considered ourselves lucky to have received our final payment, even though it was late, and we were very relieved to never deal with Pipeline Foods again. Fast forward a whole year to August 31st of 2022, we received a preference claim or clawback letter from Manti and Associates, and that is the Pipeline Foods bankruptcy trustee. When the letter came in the mail, because of how it was written and how it was formatted, it appeared to be a scam. It very forcefully demanded that we repay money to the trustee using all caps and all bold letters. Shane showed the letter to me, and we looked it up online and confirmed that it was indeed a real clawback letter. After we did a lot of research online, we found a clawback response letter template from a bankruptcy of a similar agricultural company. In reviewing the federal bankruptcy code cited in the template, we believed that we had the same valid defense to the claim of preferential payments because all the payments we received were also made according to the terms of our contract and in the ordinary course of business. We responded to the bankruptcy trustee by certified registered letter stating all of the contract numbers, the dates of the deliveries, the dates of the payments received from Pipeline Foods, and we reiterated our claim that all of our payments were received during the ordinary course of business. We demanded a response from the bankruptcy trustee if they did not agree with our position, but we never did receive any response, and we have not received any further legal documents or letters from Pipeline or the bankruptcy trustee. Organic Farmers Association believes that the statute of limitations may have passed for the Pipeline Foods preference claims. So I guess we're still kind of waiting to see if anything else comes out of this issue and sitting with our fingers crossed that it's been resolved. Our experience with this issue is that there isn't much support for farmers who sell grain to companies or grain elevators that end up filing bankruptcy. Some states have indemnity funds to protect against non-payment where grain was delivered, but Minnesota did not have an indemnity fund at this time. We reached out to other farmers on ag forums online. We reached out to the Organic Farmers Association to find out if there was a group of affected farmers that could possibly band together, maybe to share information and resources. But there wasn't anything available that we could find at the time, so we sort of went at it on our own. We're sharing our story here today in the hopes that maybe bankruptcy legislation can be changed to protect farmers who make deliveries and are owed payments per the terms of their contracts. We're also hoping that maybe our story will help educate farmers about the ordinary course of business defense under federal bankruptcy code. So thanks very much for listening to our story. We appreciate it and look forward to answering any questions at the end of the call.
Thank you, Tanya. That was really helpful. Everybody do just write down your questions or pop them in the chat. And next we will move to Kevin Fulton, who will share a little bit about his operation and also his experience with Pipeline Foods. So Kevin, I've got your slides ready too here.
Okay. Thanks, Julia. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can I just say, Kevin is an organic grain farmer from Nebraska, and he's going to share with us how he and his attorneys together brought down the amount originally demanded in his clawback letter. So thank you, Kevin. But first, he'll share a little bit about his farm, which you can see here.
Just been farming organically for about the last 20 years. I'll just go run through some slides quickly and give you an idea of a little bit more about my farming operation. So go ahead, Julia, and go to the next slide. Just what some of our crops look like. Go ahead. I do a lot of grazing, and we raise corn, soybeans, wheat, cover crops, hay, cattle. We've done sheep. Yeah, that's some wild stuff we raise. But anyway, we've run a lot of cattle over the years, done a lot of grass finishing. I'm really proud of our native grasses that you see here in this picture. That's on native virgin prairie. After high intensity stock grazing cover crops, we try to graze year round. You know, we get lots of snow some years, but we graze pretty much year round. Those are sheep there. Also have some bees. There's some oats, organic oats that I had a number of years ago. It's a Clear Creek Valley where some of my land is. My entire land base is certified organic, so the pasture and everything. And that photo there that was not touched up or had any alterations. That was how black it looked that day. And that storm passed over my house there and went a few miles down south of us and just wiped out a number of crop fields in a hailstorm. But anyway, so I kind of, you know, we have, as farmers, we have a lot of different risks out here that we have to deal with. And this Pipeline Foods bankruptcy thing was certainly a situation that I had to deal with. And it's kind of like, you know, weathering another storm. So anyway, I think, is that the last slide there? Okay, I think. So just to give you a little background on the pipeline thing, we contracted in February of 2021. I contracted my soybean crop, my 2020 crop. We delivered those beans in March and April. They sent the trucks, picked them up at our farm, and we were paid in April and May. They were a little slow to pay, but they paid us. And then I found out in July 8th, that they'd filed bankruptcy. And then, when I found that out, I was, relieved because I thought, well, I'm fortunate we got paid because I knew there was a lot of farmers that didn't get paid, and I felt bad for them. And then almost a year later, after we delivered the beans, that we got the clawback letter, and it was from the court appointed liquidating trustee of the bankruptcy estate of Pipeline Foods, and said we had 21 days to pay it back, and it's pretty demanding. And my initial thoughts were, I'll just reply and tell them to go to hell. I've been in a lot of court battles over the years, and I've won all of them, and so I'm not too intimidated. But that only works if the law is in your favor. So I thought, before I go off half-cocked, I better get some legal advice and find out what the law really is, which I did. So I hired talked to some attorneys, and hired some attorneys out of Omaha that specialize in bankruptcy. And, they informed me that, well, unfortunately, that the laws are on the side of the people filing the bankruptcy, and that, we could certainly fight this, go to court in Delaware, and most likely we would lose. And I would have to pay back the full amount, which was $140,000. Plus, I would have incurred a lot more legal fees by that time. It probably would have cost me several $100,000. And that if we negotiated now, we had a better chance. They would probably be a lot more willing to negotiate as time goes on. Then, their willingness to do that would probably decrease. So that was the legal advice that I had. So we went that route. We started to negotiate with them back and forth, and we used a lot of different strategies. And anyway, even though I held up my end of the contract, I didn't have really much standing as far as the law goes. And so, and I had looked under my mattress and a lot of other places and realized I didn't have $140,000 laying around. So best thing to do is probably try to minimize the damages. So in the end, we negotiated it down to $50,000, and I paid them, and I had probably about $10,000 in legal fees. And I knew I could weather that storm. In fact, in most years, I could have paid that out of my, just from my farming business without taking out any loans. But last year was a severe drought year, so I was already several $100,000 short on income. So I had to take out a loan for $50,000 at the bank, so to cover that loss. But that was certainly better than it could have easily been several $100,000 by the time I fought it in court with all the legal fees and so forth. So I guess I'm still pissed off about it, but I feel like I did the best I could, and I'm working with several organizations to try to maybe see what we can do to come up with some solutions by either changing the law or come up with some type of safety net that would protect farmers in situations like this, just like we're protected in a hailstorm with our crops. So, it just seems like the most ridiculous law I've ever come across in all my years of doing business. So I guess that's really all I have. It kind of explains our situation, and I'm not saying that's the best strategy for everybody. I'm not giving out any legal advice. But I've learned over the years, the best thing you can do in situations like this is just hire the best attorneys you can, and that's helped me out in a lot of situations throughout my life. So
thank you for sharing that. I just want to thank all of you for sharing your personal experiences. I hadn't even met Shane and Tanya prior to calling them last week, so just really appreciate you jumping in to help other people. I'm going to stop sharing right now so that we can have a discussion. So I do invite everybody to come on camera, and those folks that are on the call, some of you may have also been through this. Please feel free to jump in, or if folks also have questions that you'd like to ask of the presenters. And we also do have Brad here. Thank you again for being here, Brad, to be able to answer questions if anyone has any about the indemnity fund option that's available in Iowa. So just open it up.
Hey, Julia, there's one thing I didn't mention is that after this was all over, we now filed an unsecured claim so that we can hopefully recoup some of that $50,000 after the secured creditors are paid. You know, if there's any crumbs left over, you know, farmers like myself might be able to get back some of that money, but that remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you. Questions or other thoughts?
I could bring up something. I did a few interviews with various farmers, and I'm wondering maybe Brad can answer this, or if someone else might know. One farmer told me that their banker told them that if they receive their payment as wired funds, that that's the same as cash, and that cash cannot be clawed back. There is a charge to you for those wired funds, so you don't get every last penny. But I didn't know if that was true as far as, maybe Brad doesn't know about clawback letters and bankruptcy law, but that seemed like an interesting, especially if the buyer was, you know, paying late and that sort of thing, that you could just say, I'm not going to deliver until I get the money wired to me.
Can anyone speak to that, Brad?
The wiring of funds is actually, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. The ACH payments are something that we're starting to get new into, but as the clawback side of things, I can't answer anything on that, if it's protected or not.
Okay.
And
Well, that
just,
might be something you can talk to your banker about.
and just Shane was receiving ACH payments, but we didn't pursue that as a defense, but it's good to know that it's potentially an option. So we'll check into that too.
I just want to add a little something there too. We were paid through ACH, but I think the biggest thing for us was finding, I think it was Title 11 of the USC code. And it stated in there that if your payment was received under the normal course of business, that we were exempt from having to pay that back. So that to us was the biggest help. And if you have proof or can show that your payment was under normal course of business and that it in fact was not a preferential payment, then they're not entitled to it back. And that was the defense that we used, and it seems to have worked for us.
Thank you, Shane. Dave Bishop, not to put you on the spot, but I know you've been doing some work on this issue. Would you care to share with the group?
Yes, last week I was part of a group from the National Farmers Union. I went to Washington, D.C. to lobby for the Farm Bill. We visited 12 congressional offices, presented Kevin's story to each, as well as a flyer that was produced by the Organic Farmers Association. And we discovered that not one single person that we talked to, staffer or legislator, had ever heard of bankruptcy clawback. We got 12 or 14 blank looks. So apparently this is one of the best kept secrets in Washington, D.C. Our ask was that some form of protection to farmers, for farmers, be offered through the Farm Bill. Kind of one of those things that you have no control over, you can't see coming. It's like a bad storm or a hailstorm taking down the crops. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. It takes you by surprise, and we feel it's the same kind of issue here, that we need to have some kind of protection for farmers so that this doesn't bankruptcy you through no fault of your own. Haven't heard back from anyone yet. We'll see, but we did give it a shot.
Thank you for making that trip and doing that work. Other questions? Thoughts?
So I'm just sharing what farmers had said to me also. And there was another farmer who did not get the clawback letter, but the payments were broken up, I think, between him and a couple of landlords. So it made that larger payment much smaller. There was more than one entity that was receiving the payment. And so he thought that perhaps because it was, $25,000, that it wasn't worth it for them to go after the smaller amount. I don't, that's just conjecture. We don't know that is the real reason, but so if he would have had a $75 check, maybe he would have gotten a clawback letter, but he thought because his payments were much smaller, to different people, that they didn't bother, to bring a lawsuit against him. So that could be another strategy, to have kind of smaller payments, because it's costing the bank. Now, I just want to address something Kevin said. We all hope that if there's any crumbs left over, that the farmers would get it, but truthfully, I don't think that would be the case, because the infrastructure, all the different grain cleaning, all of those were sold at like kind of fire sale prices. And so the people who were holding those loans, collateral for those buildings, and the main bank, Rabobank, really, they're the ones that sent out the clawback letter. They are trying to get every last dime that they can get.
I have a question for the group, which is what other farmers that you're talking with, like, are there other farmers that are interested in working on this in a group setting, kind of as Tanya was discussing earlier? Would be nice to have a group of farmers that are working on solutions. And I'm wondering if you all, it seems like the farmers that have spoken here might be interested in such a thing, but are you aware of others who might be interested, and would you be up for helping to recruit them if we were to put together, say, a winter work group on this topic?
I know there is a Facebook page for the Pipeline Foods bankruptcy. So I've just been trolling farmer names off of that Facebook page, trying to find someone who might be in the same boat that we're in. We did reach out to one farmer, and he kind of did the same thing, sent a response and was waiting to hear back. But we'd be happy to reach out to anybody that we think might be tangled up in that mess and see if they want to do something to maybe help people going forward.
Great. Anyone else have thoughts on that or ideas? Brad, can I ask you, from the presentation that we heard from Jim, there was, a certain number of days after which a claim could no longer be filed. And it seems like some of the folks may have found out after that point that the bankruptcy claim was being filed. What should farmers do in that type of a situation? Are there other funds available, or some other strategy besides an indemnity fund that could serve them in that way? Or are they up a creek, so to speak?
They can file for a claim, but most likely it would be rejected because it's 120 days. I know that we're working on different procedures for things to assist that stuff, but nothing in stone right now.
Okay. And would you all be up for spitballing, say, over the winter about some potential solutions? Because you all have some experience with the indemnity fund under your belts already.
Yeah. And we're also wanting to get the farmer's perspective of this as well, because we want to know when you have red flags at the places that you're selling grain to. We love to hear those. Well, don't want to say love. We want to know what's going on out there. We do our inspections on a certain timetable, and if there's something out there that we aren't hearing about, we want to know so that we can go in and investigate to find out what is really going on.
Okay, so you want to hear from folks regardless of whether necessarily the indemnity fund is going to be supportive or not.
Right, right.
And anybody selling into any handler in Iowa.
In Iowa, yeah, a licensed grain dealer.
Licensed grain dealer. So folks don't have to be located there, but if they're selling into Iowa.
Correct.
You want to know.
Yep.
Okay.
Jim mentioned the unlicensed grain dealers. Can someone be a grain dealer legally and not be licensed?
Yes.
Or do they have to be licensed? Oh, they can be unlicensed grain dealers.
If they're using it for their own feed use. So if they're grinding up their
okay.
corn and whatnot for feed use, you don't need one. That's the one off the top of my head. Yeah. Or if
Okay,
I guess
but if you're
another.
buying it to,
Go
if you're
ahead.
buying to resell, then you must be licensed.
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I want to invite the folks who haven't already spoken to speak if you have something to share or to ask. And if not, that's okay too, but I just want to make sure we hear from everyone who wants to share. Okay, well, hearing nothing else, I will certainly be following up with the folks that are interested in working on this on an ongoing basis. And I know Harriet's, as she shared, done a number of interviews with farmers and has learned a great deal. Want to reiterate that there will be a couple of articles coming out on this topic very soon in the Organic Farmers Association's publication, Organic Voice, and also online in blog format. And that OFA has been working on this issue and will continue to be working on this issue in, with the farmers on the ground and also in collaboration with other groups who I know some of you are already working with, which is great to hear. I will just share once again that if you are, let's see here, if you are hearing from folks or you have people who are in need of connecting on this topic, please do send them our way. We have a farmer services hotline that we can be reached at, but that rings to both Harriet and myself, and also have our email addresses there should anybody want to get in touch on this issue. And we will be sharing this, the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel moving forward. So if you do know anyone who might benefit from hearing from these farmers or from hearing from Jim about the Indemnity Fund, we'll make that available so that folks can hopefully get connected and we can be in touch with one another. So thank you all very much for your time and your participation today. And thank you especially to the presenters for sharing their experiences. We appreciate you and we'll look forward to working on this further together.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, thanks very much. Everybody take care.
Thank you, everybody.